The first thing we see is a flashback, and we see the beginning of a sunrise. We see the woodland hill that young Merlin climbed to get to Camelot the first time we ever saw him. But this time, atop the hill is Elaine, who trains her gaze on the distant castle of Camelot. She raises her triple-bladed axe towards the kingdom, and closes her eyes. At the command of her willpower magic, darkness falls over Camelot. A tangled mass of storm clouds gathers above the castle. We then see a field of wheat. For the moment it looks healthy and full of life, but then it begins to shrivel and curl in on itself, rotting in a matter of seconds. We then see other healthier looking crops, that then begin to wither and perish. A farmer walks out onto his field, and he stares speechless at all of the dead crops that lie around him. His eyes wander to the furious storm clouds that collect overhead. Something is wrong. Elaine then opens her eyes, and the gold colour of magic fades from them. She smiles. Her task has only just begun. We then head back to present day, and Merlin crashes into his bedroom in absolute panic. "Arthur! Get up! Arthur!" Arthur then awakes with a start and tumbles out of bed. He manages to land on his feet, those old soldier instincts kicking in. "What is it? What's wrong?" "Mordred. Mordred is back." Arthur then starts to relax. "Merlin, it's alright. You were hallucinating again." No, it wasn't a hallucination. Mordred is alive. He talked to me inside my head." "In your head?" Arthur says, clearly not buying it. "Yes, with magic. He has his memories, he knows everything, and he's got Gwen." "Merlin, slow down. Start from the beginning." Merlin is beside himself, but he strives to gain his composure. "I was in the kitchen when I heard him. Some sorcerers can communicate with each other in their minds telepathically, and Mordred told me he had a proposition. He'll release Gwen if we give him Morgana." "Are you sure of this?" "Yes, I swear it. I would know Mordred's voice anywhere. Please, sire, you have to believe me." Merlin's earnest then wins Arthur over. "Alright, just calm down, I believe you. Just, where's Morgana?" "Probably in her flat." "Why?" Arthur then runs past Merlin, going through the flat to the door. Merlin whirls around to follow, but his eyes lock onto one of his four walls. In blood-red paint, the words he'd written in his sleep when having a nightmare jump out at him. History repeats itself. A chill then runs through Merlin. We then see Arthur just outside Morgana's flat, and he knocks on the door. The door is then opened by Galahad, who, after what happened at dinner earlier that night, is not their biggest fan. "Galahad," Arthur says, "where's Morgana?" "She's busy," Galahad says in a cold tone. "Why?" "Just keep a close eye on her. Don't open the door for anyone but me and Merlin. Actually, don't open it for anyone but me. You can't tell me what to do. Just lock the door when you get inside." "Gladly." Galahad then closes the door just as Merlin runs up to Arthur, and Merlin's hand goes for Morgana's door. "What are you doing?" Arthur says. "We have to hand Morgana over to Mordred. It's the only way to save Gwen." "What? No! We will not give up on her just like that. Arthur, Gwen's life and yours are at risk. We have to do something. Mordred said he's watching the building." "How long ago did he contact you?" "Barely 5 minutes. Why?" "Because I'm going to need you to speak to him again." Merlin freezes. This prospect presents new terrors for him. We then go back to another flashback in the royal chambers, and we see Gwen lying on her bed, frail and ill, with Leon at her bedside tenderly pressing a wet cloth to her forehead. An exhausted and sombre Percival then enters. "Your Majesty," he says, "I know that now is not the time, but there have been strange reports. Disease has ravished all the kingdom's crops overnight. The wells have gone dry, and a strange sickness is spreading through the lower town. Gwen is not ready for this, Percival, Leon then says. She needs rest. Divide what we have from the storerooms among the people, Gwen says in a weak tone. Send out knights to the nearest sources of fresh water, and find Merlin. I'm certain this is the work of sorcery. Of course, Percival replies. I'm sorry for your loss. Sorry for the both of you. Percival then bows and exits, and tears slip from Gwen's eyes as she places a hand on her stomach. They lost the baby. As we return to present day, we then go to Elizabeth Tower, and Gwen is still chained up, guarded by Mordred, Accolon and Morgause. Emerus has yet to acknowledge the offer, Mordred begins to say, but I doubt it will take him long. Gwen then looks at Accolon. You said you wanted Morgana dead! You lied to me! Surprised, are we, Sir Gwen? It's not the first time you've been a fool, and I highly doubt it will be the last. Have they attempted to exit the flat yet? Morgause cuts in. I warned him that they are under our watch. Fear not, Merlin will comply with our terms. You can be sure of that. We then go back to Merlin's flat. I'm not contacting Mordred, Merlin says to Arthur. Yes, you are, Merlin. How else are we going to negotiate our terms? Just do as I say. Tell him I have a new trade in mind. What trade? Just tell him, Merlin. Though reluctant, Merlin then closes his eyes, beginning to channel his telepathy. We then go back to Elizabeth Tower, and we see Mordred pacing along the platform as he waits for a response, the vast bells casting shadows upon him. Mordred. Upon hearing Merlin's voice for the first time in 1500 years, Mordred pauses and breaks into a smile. Emerus. How is Arthur? This matter will be dealt with on our terms. I'm listening. Arthur would like to propose a new trade. Gwen is released, we then see Arthur say, clearly instructing Merlin what to say. You will release Gwen, Merlin repeats. And in return, Arthur says, continuing instructing Merlin, they will receive me. Merlin freezes. What? No! You are not sacrificing yourself in Morgana's place, Arthur. I won't allow it. Tell him, Merlin. Well, Mordred cuts in. What would we receive for releasing Gwen? Hold on, Mordred. Perhaps you should have considered your terms before contacting me. My offer remains the same. Gwen for Morgana. You have until tomorrow's witching hour to make your decision. If we refuse, what happens to Gwen? Mordred doesn't respond, however. He's already gone. What did he say? Arthur says. We have until 3 in the morning tomorrow. After that the deal will be off. What time is it now? Almost 4 in the morning. Then we'd better form a plan while time is on our side. We then once more go back to another flashback, in Camelot's village. It's the middle of the day, but with the canopy of clouds overhead, it's almost as dark as evening. We see Gwen is outside one of the village cottages in discussion with the new physician. She seems worn out, but resolute. Nothing I've tried has worked, the new physician begins to say. Once one is stricken with the fever, they die within a day. It's not your fault. Just keep me informed. And don't stop searching for a remedy. The physician then nods, and Gwen carries on through the village. Leon is with Percival when he happens to see her. Concerned, he then hurries to her side. "Guinevere," he says, "what are you doing here? You need rest." "And while I rest, more of our people perish. I cannot just lie around with all that's happening." "Your Majesties!" Gwen and Leon then whirl around. The street's villagers rush to decide to clear a path as a mounted knight gallops towards the king and queen. He pulls to a stop before them, clearly distressed. "Your Majesties, a host is approaching from the east. They march on Camelot." "How many men?" Leon asks him. "Roughly 10,000. "Whose standard do they bear?" "No standard, your Majesty. They carry no banners or flags." "Then who leads them?" "A woman. She wears a blindfold and carries an axe with 3 blades. Gwen then exchanged a worried frown with Leon. How can anyone fight blindfolded? We then see Gwen, Leon, Percival and several soldiers and knights stand and look into the distance. They see the enemy army marching towards their territory. It is led by a blindfolded Elaine in her ivory white armour, bearing her menacing triple-bladed axe. "Rally the men," Gwen begins to say. "Prepare for battle. Shall we close the gates?" one of the knights calls out. "The gates stay open until Merlin and his apprentice return." "But the people," the knight responds. "Post extra soldiers," Gwen says, cutting him off. "But leave the gates open for Merlin as long as you can." The knight then bows and exits. "If we die, we will die with swords in our hands," Gwen says passionately. "For the love of Camelot!" Leon calls out, and all the soldiers and knights repeat it. Gwen then gazes out over Elaine's approaching forces, her fear laced with determination. "For the love of Camelot." We then go back to present day, in Merlin's flat, and from the window we see Arthur scanning the buildings and busy streets for any signs of their enemies. "Mordred must have accomplices," he begins to say. "How else could he have captured Gwen from right under our noses? I'm sure he's made contacts. Goodness knows how long that killer's been back. But I don't understand why. Only you were supposed to come back." "We need to keep Morgana under watch. If Mordred does have an eye on the flat, she cannot leave until we've found a way to resolve this. If we lose her, we not only lose our way to save Gwen, but any chance of reconciliation with her. Not to mention she would join forces with Mordred to bring about your downfall. Again. Merlin, a bit of optimism would be helpful. You see, if you had poisoned her yesterday, Mordred would have no use for Gwen. He'd kill him. Another reason why you should think things through." Merlin is silent for a moment. "I just don't want history to repeat itself." "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Forget it." Arthur then looks at him, and rethinks what he said. "Look, I'm sorry. I have no right to find fault with you. You've only ever sought to protect me." Merlin is still silent. The prospect of losing Arthur to Mordred or Morgana is still beyond terrifying for him. Arthur then goes over to Merlin and places a reassuring hand on his shoulder, and Merlin takes his wrist and holds his hand there, and they look at each other. "Arthur, if anything were to happen to you now, it won't. Mordred is too foolish to think he stands a chance against you, but there must be some reason he's here. What if it's to take you away again? Why would that be? I don't know. Why did I have to wait 1500 years? Why couldn't I have gotten you to the lake in time? Why did you have to die at all? None of it makes sense. It never has." "Merlin, I am alright. I swear on my life, not on your life," Merlin says, cutting him off. "On someone else's life. No one is going to kill me. Your waiting is over. Forever. I will not let anything happen to myself or to you. That's a promise. Alright?" That's a hard promise for Merlin to believe after all the pain he's known. I can't lose you again. I can't bear it. You can't bear something. Now there is the biggest lie I've ever heard. Merlin Ambrosius can't do something. Rubbish. Merlin, you have no idea how strong you are. At this point, I believe you could do just about anything. By now, I just hope you wait for me to catch my breath before you go on to amaze me again. It's been such a long time since anyone has spoken to Merlin with such faith. He's used to being the one to encourage Arthur, but with these roles reversed, he's touched by the words. The phone then rings. How inconvenient. Vexed, Merlin answers it, but not in his normal voice. "Ah, yes, speaking," he says, and Arthur stares at him in silence. Could this day get any weirder? "No, the castle is not for sale. My apologies. Have a lovely day." Merlin then hangs up, and Arthur gives him an odd look. I'd ask why you assume the voice of an old woman when using that device. But then again, you'd tell me, and I'd probably wish you hadn't. Probably. With a sigh, Merlin then goes to the window to scan the perimeter as Arthur paces in thought. "I'm worried about Gwen," Merlin says. "As am I. Goodness knows what they are doing to him. They will stop at nothing to get what they want. I only hope he lasts. We need to get to him before it's too late." Sire," Merlin says, clearly noticing something outside. "You might want to come and see this." Arthur then joins Merlin at the window. "Yes, Merlin, it looks like rain. We have more important things to think about right now. More important than Elian." "What?" Arthur then does a double take. "Unless I'm hallucinating again. That's him down there." Merlin points out Elian, who stands on the sidewalk outside trying to hail a cab just like a normal person would, as if they hadn't seen him die before their very own eyes over 1500 years ago. Growing accustomed to such unexpected meetings, Arthur doesn't waste a second. He bolts out of the front door with Merlin right behind him. We see Elian just flag down a cab as Arthur and Merlin run from the flat to stop him. "Elian!" Arthur shouts. "Wait!" Elian glances up to see them coming towards him. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Arthur is lost for words, and Merlin then cuts in to help. "I'm Merlin. This is Arthur," he says, offering his hand. "Oh, you must be the neighbours Miss LaFay mentioned. I'm Dr. Thomas," he says while shaking Merlin's hand. "Dr. Thomas? Wait, you're Morgana's psychiatrist?" "Ah, so she mentioned me. Very sweet girl. I was just..." A frown then forms on Elian's face. "Just dropping something off for her. Hey, do I already know you from somewhere? Maybe. Possibly. Probably. Maybe I'll place it later. Well, I need to get going. It was nice meeting you." Elian then heads towards the cab again and opens the door and begins to situate his briefcase inside. "Wait! Don't go!" Arthur says. He then turns to Merlin and speaks in a low tone. "You go inside and keep an eye on Morgana. She cannot be left unattended, especially with Mordred watching the building." "What about you?" "I'll deal with Elian. I'm not leaving you alone." "I'm not alone. I have Elian. He's one of my finest knights. At least, he will be when he remembers. My lord, I have to protect you." "Trust me, Merlin," Arthur says, cutting him off. "I'll be alright. I just need to find a way to convince Elian to come inside with us. We can't have him falling into Mordred's hands." With immense reluctance, Merlin obeys out of respect alone and heads back to their flat, and Elian glances back to see that Arthur is still standing there. "Is something wrong?" Elian then says. No, Nothing. Where is your sister? Gwen. You know her? Yes, I know her. We're old friends. Where is she? She's overseeing a trial. A trial? Well, yes. She's a judge. I'm meeting her for lunch after the trial. Will you take me to her? Elin eyes him, puzzled. Please. We then see Merlin as he hurries to the window to check on Arthur, just in time to see him enter the cab with Elin. What? The cab then drives off at a high speed. Damn it! Arthur! He slams the windowsill. Mordred is watching! What on earth are you thinking? We then head back to Elizabeth Tower, and we see Mordred spin away from the window where he was watching Merlin's flat. Arthur has left the flat. What? Accolon responds. Where is he? In a cab. I'm going after him. Accolon, however, then grabs Mordred to stop him. No, Mordred. Odds are it's a trap. Trap or no trap, I'm going. I agree with Mordred, Morgana cuts in. I am sick of waiting around doing nothing. Let me get Morgana. I do not fear Emerus. Neither of you are going anywhere, Gwen observes his captor's exchange with amusement. But there is nothing protecting Arthur now, Mordred continues. I have to kill him. You forget two very important things, Accolon begins to say. One, even if you did manage to kill Arthur, you would have Emerus to answer to. And two, Arthur has a sword forged in a dragon's breath, a sword that he used to kill you before, Mordred, and would use again. Mordred then whirls away, exasperated, and Accolon then turns to Morgana. As for you, Morgana is being guarded by Emerus. You may be foolish enough not to fear him, but let me tell you I fear him very much. If you want to sabotage everything we have been working towards, then be my guest. Morgana, however, is not as easily swayed as Mordred, and she still looks very determined. Well, Gwen says with a smile on his face, sounds like things are heating up. Shut up, Accolon says, furious at the whole situation. We then return to Merlin's flat, and with haste, Merlin slides on his coat and opens the door. He's got to go after that idiot king before their enemies find him. Impulsive, witless prat, Merlin grumbles to himself. He then slams the door shut and storms down the hall for the stairs. He starts down them at full speed and rams into Morgana, who is coming up, and both of them cry out in surprise. Morgana's eyes widen in fright as she starts to topple backward. But Merlin grabs her by the arm, and she starts to take him with her. Quickly he seizes the rail so that when they do fall, they don't roll to the bottom. What? Morgana begins to say. Do you just not look where you're going? I could have broken my neck. In a huff, she then gets her feet back under her and stomps up the rest of the stairs, and a flustered Merlin sits there in her wake. I have a neck too, Merlin says to himself. He then gets up and clears the rest of the stairs. He opens the door, about to hurry out after Arthur, but then he hesitates, and glances back up the stairs after her. He then slams the door shut, spins around and starts back up the stairs. Fine, Arthur. I'll watch your sister. But you bloody well watch your own back or I'll kill you myself. We then go back to another flashback, and we see that Camelot is overrun. Fires burn, and frightened villagers flock into the main square seeking protection from the enemy army. The enemy soldiers then close in, and some villagers rush about the courtyard, disorientated from fear and unsure of where to hide. Other villagers attempt to defend themselves but are quickly cut down. Gwen strives to maintain order, but with enemy soldiers pouring in through their gates, panic is imminent. She ushers some villagers up the main square steps and inside the castle for protection. Everyone inside, she calls out. All of you, listen to me. You must take shelter. A knight then stumbles toward Gwen, pressing a hand to the bleeding wound in his side. My lady, there are too many of them. We must close the gates. Has anyone seen Merlin? There has been no sight of him. Gwen then beholds the chaos overwhelming the courtyard. Villagers scream and scatter, and Camelot's soldiers attempt to shield them from the enemy soldiers. Her mighty kingdom is on the brink of destruction. An exhausted and blood-splattered Percival then backs into the main square, leading an assortment of knights. He slices an enemy soldier to the ground. Percival, Gwen calls out. Where is Merlin? I don't know. Elaine, still blindfolded, then marches into the main square with the enemy army at her back, and Percival charges toward her with a roaring battle cry, and raises his sword to strike. But Elaine slashes her triple-bladed axe across his chest, and Percival cries out in agony. Gwen gasps, gutted by the sight, and Percival falls, dead. Percival! Elaine's blindfolded gaze then fixes upon Gwen. Unarmed, Gwen slowly backs away up the main steps. Once at the top, Gwen spins around to witness her people falling all around her. Terrified villagers race past her to get inside. It's too much to bear. The cries, the blood, the death. She closes her eyes. Her people can wait no longer. Close the gates, she calls out. Close them, now! Hurry! Knights rush to carry out her command as Gwen joins the flow of those seeking shelter and heads inside. She then explodes into the hall where the commotion is hardly different than that in the courtyard. And a hand then seizes her by the arm, and she screams. Gwen! It's alright. It's me, Leon says. Leon! Percival is dead. Leon just stands there for a second, stunned, but after that second he quickly composes himself. Seek refuge in the throne room. If by some miracle we survive this, Camelot will need a ruler. What about you? Don't worry about me. Go! Gwen then takes a few steps away, but she stops and turns around. Leon. Leon meets her eyes. This is the end, isn't it? The last time they will ever speak to one another. He runs back to her and pulls her into his arms, and they share a desperate kiss. I love you, Guinevere. I always have. Leon then releases her and charges into the main square out to defend Camelot, and Gwen lingers for a moment, staring after him, and then she retreats up the stairs. We then head back to present day, and we see Merlin standing outside Morgana's door, anxious and uncomfortable, and in an all-around foul mood, preparing himself for the worst. He then knocks on her door. Morgana then answers, wearing the same dress from the dinner last night, shoes on, makeup fresh, cup of coffee in one hand and a handbag in the other. She's been getting ready to go somewhere, and she's also irritated to see Merlin. What do you want? I wanted to apologise for what I said yesterday at dinner. My behaviour was despicable, my words deplorable. I don't know what came over me. No, neither do I. She then looks over her shoulder. Gally, I need to get going. Good luck! Galahad then calls back to her. Are you finished? Morgana then says, turning back to Merlin. I have to get to a job interview. You're leaving Galahad alone? No, I just arranged for the landlady to come watch him. Are you going to start telling me how to raise my son, too? Well, if you would give me all of 1 second to explain. He's then interrupted by Galahad coming up from behind Morgana, holding her phone up. For you, Mum. Morgana then puts her handbag down on the floor and takes the phone in her free hand. And Merlin stands awkwardly in the doorway, not knowing whether he should come in or not. Hello? Morgana says into her phone. Yes, that's me. I'm on my way right now. What? But you haven't even seen me yet. If you would just give me a chance. No, wait! Wait! Morgana then turns her back to Merlin. This is awkward for everyone. I need this job. You can't do this. Please. Merlin and Galahad then exchange glances across the way. It doesn't sound good. After a moment, Morgana lowers her phone. The call has ended, and she stands there, lost. Was that the job people? Galahad asks. They didn't want me. They picked someone else. She then spins to Merlin. Look, why don't you... But before she finishes, she stumbles over her handbag and she spills her coffee down the front of her dress. Oh, this is my only nice dress. I need this for my interviews. Galahad then retrieves a towel from the kitchen, and Morgana accepts it and tries in vain to dab the spilled coffee from her dress. Well, Merlin says, genuinely trying to help. At least you don't have to go anywhere today. Morgana then gives up trying to save her dress, and she slams the door in his face. That went well. Merlin heaves a sigh. Maybe he should have tried harder. We then go back to Ellian and Arthur, and they both sit in the back seat of a cab, and Ellian eyes Arthur, who keeps his eyes trained on the road through the window. How do you know my sister? Ellian asks him. You could say we were together for a time. She never mentioned you. I imagine not. Are you sure we mean the same Gwen? Guinevere Thomas. She's unafraid of hard work, knows how to handle herself and everyone else. She draws out the good in everyone, and when there is no good, she provides it. That Guinevere? That's right, Ellian says, mildly taken aback. I guess you must know her after all. You could say that again. Ellian then gives Arthur a curious once-over, as Arthur resumes his staring out of the window. We then go back to Merlin's flat, and he paces, casting fretful glances out of the window, and once again begins to murmur to himself. Complete simpleton. I waited 1500 years for him to throw himself into every dangerous situation that arises. Ridiculous. The phone then rings, and Merlin answers it. Who is it? He says in an annoyed tone. I called earlier with a question concerning the castle you own. Is it possible you would reconsider and sell it to me? Shaking his head with irritation, Merlin then changes his voice once again. I told you once, and I'll tell you again. The castle is not for sale, and never will be. How old are you? Merlin frowns, trying to remember. Not every alter ego could have an exact age. I don't know. 104? Is your health decent? I hardly believe that's any of your business. Goodbye. Merlin then hangs up, and he sends an anxious glance up at the clock. He then resumes his pacing. We then go back to another flashback, and we go to the old shrine where Merlin and Elaine visited. We then see the tomb in which Merlin is trapped in, and it is in the midst of a violent storm. There is erratic strikes of lightning and cracks of thunder. Coincidentally, on the most climactic strike, Merlin's magic blows the tomb's lid off. Merlin then gasps, bolting upright, his eyes adjusting to the sudden light of being unconscious for so long. He braces the side of his back where Elaine stabbed him as he rises, groaning from the effort. He tries to climb out of the tomb and onto his feet, only to fall to the ground, weak from loss of blood. He puts a hand over his injured side. Piohili Lisa Min. He then raises his blood-stained shirt, and we can see his wound heal until not a trace remains. Merlin then takes a step forward and stumbles. He gets his feet under him and continues on foot. He needs to get back to Camelot before it's too late. A few moments later, Merlin sees the destruction of Camelot. Smoke rises and the enemy army pours into the city. Horror washes over him. No! We then see knights of Camelot fight Elaine's army and still try to keep them from penetrating the castle, but they are severely outnumbered. The knights then gape in terror as the gates explode open. They expect to see more enemy soldiers to spill into the main square, but their vision is obscured by thick dust and smoke. But as it settles, Merlin is seen stalking out of the smoke. As Merlin then walks past, we see what he has left in his wake. Hundreds upon hundreds of dead enemy soldiers cover the earth. Merlin has not left one of them standing. We then head back to present day, in Morgana's flat, and now, wearing fresh clothes, she bends over her sink with the water running as she frantically scrubs away at the coffee stains on her dress. We then see more ghosts stand across the street from Merlin's flat, and she watches the building. Morgana. Morgana freezes in the middle of her scrubbing, and her head snaps up. A look of sudden fear takes hold of her. Morgana, it is your sister. I last contacted you a few weeks ago to inquire about your location. Morgana drops her dress in the sink with trembling hands, and she stares ahead into the mirror, terrified. I know where you are now. They cannot keep you from me. Morgana's losing it at this point. She answers out loud as she does not remember how to use her telepathy. No, not again. I know you can hear me, Morgana. You must listen. Come outside. Cross the street that is in front of your flat. She holds her head, so scared. She has no idea what's happening to her. No! Leave me alone! You will come outside and cross the street now. It is vital that you obey. Tell no one where you have gone. You must listen to me, and you will trust me. Go away! If you do this, I will leave you alone. If you do not, the voices will never stop. You must trust me, sister. I mean you no harm. Morgana then bows against the mirror, shaking her head. We then head back to Elizabeth Tower, and Mordred approaches Accolon, seeing his perplexed frown. What is it? Mordred says. Have you seen more ghosts? No, I thought she was... The two then glance around and look back at each other. This can't be good. I'm going after her, Accolon says. Stay. He then hurries off and Mordred and Gwen are left alone together. Conditions have not improved for Gwen. All strength has been wrung from him after the hours of dark magic torture. From the shadow of the bells, Mordred then emerges and looms towards him. The witching hour draws nearer, he begins to say, and yet your friends have made no attempt to rescue you. Gwen is silent, too weary to fight back this time. It is hardly surprising though, given that when I reached out to the knights for help in my hour of need, they refused to give it. You see, Arthur spoke of equality, yet he and all his men clearly had their favourites. He then bends down and whispers in Gwen's ear, So much for the brotherhood of knights. Grabbing Gwen by the hair, Mordred then gives the knight's head a rough shove, and then he leaves him. We then return to Morgana's flat, and we see Galahad playing with his toy knights on the floor. He looks up when Morgana comes down the hall and starts for the door. She has pulled herself together, but there is still fear in her eyes. Mum? Galahad says. Where are you going? I'm just stepping outside. Is it the voices again? Morgana freezes, and she forces a reassuring smile. "I'll only be across the street. I'll be back in a few minutes." "You don't have to listen to them, Mum. Just stay here, Galahad." Morgana then leaves her flat, and nervously, Galahad stares after her. We then see Morgana as she heads down the stairs. Her breath is shaky, and it's clear that she's scared to death. "Come, Morgana," Morgause continues. "It will be all right. You have my word, I will not harm you. Just come outside." As we then go back to Merlin's flat, a frantic knock at the door interrupts Merlin's anxious pacing, and his face brightens with hope. But as he opens the door, it's Galahad. "You're not Arthur," Merlin says. "I think my mum's in danger." "What do you mean?" "I don't know, but she sometimes hears these voices that tell her to do things, and I can usually tell because she gets really upset. And this time, I think they told her to go outside." "Wait," Merlin says. "Morgana's outside?" Merlin then dashes to the window and looks out. Outside, Morgana waits for a moment to cross the street, and then he sees waiting for her on the other side of the street is Morgause. "No! Morgana!" Merlin then races past Galahad and out of the front door. He bolts down the stairs, skipping the last few steps. The door then crashes open, and Merlin bursts out onto the sidewalk. Morgana has stepped off the curb and is a few paces into the street. "Morgana! Wait!" She then whips around to Merlin's voice, and we see Morgause across the street, furious at Merlin's interference. "No!" she exclaims. We then see Merlin rush to Morgana, and he seizes her by the arm. "What?" Morgana says, startled. "Let go!" He starts to tug her to the sidewalk, despite her struggling against him. "You need to get inside, Morgana." She then jerks her hand away from him. "You can't tell me what to do!" Yet Merlin once again takes her arm. "Morgana, I insist." "I'll come back. I just need to just stay out of it, Merlin. I have to do this." "Morgana, please. You're not thinking clearly." "I am not crazy!" Merlin pauses. He realises that those are the words he's uttered many times himself, and he stops and stares at her for a moment. A sudden empathy moves into his eyes. I know you're not." Morgana stares, scared and confused, but somewhat less defensive. "But don't do this," Merlin continues. "Come back to your son. Galahad is worried about you." Morgana wavers. She's bewildered by the madness of it all, but finally complies and lets Merlin guide her back to the flat. And Morgause watches from across the street, outraged that her plan has been foiled. She then raises a hand toward Merlin, about to fire a spell, but Merlin senses her without even turning around, and his eyes flash gold, and Morgause is sent flying backwards against the building. She crashes to the ground, disorientated, as Merlin helps Morgana inside. Enraged, Morgause gets up. She starts toward their flat, but suddenly Accolon steps in front of her. "What the hell are you doing? Do not stand in my way. Morgana is within our reach, and I will wait no longer." "Oh, so you will charge in there, recover your sister, restore her memories, and walk out together unscathed like you already own the world? Do you really think Emrys will let her out of his sight, now that you've gone and made matters worse? I told you, I do not fear Emrys." "Then fear me." Accolon then lifts his hand, and slowly clenches it into a fist, and Morgause's eyes widen. Her mouth is open, but there is no breath coming out. Just like he did with the officer, he is sucking the life out of her lungs, and she grasps at her throat. His hands then open, releasing the spell, and Morgause staggers, gasping and staring at him in shock. "Get back to the tower. Now." he starts to lead the way. No more demonstration is needed for more ghosts to follow. We then go back to another flashback in the King's Palace throne room, and Gwen stands tall as wounded knights relay events of the ongoing battle to her. "The men can no longer fend off this evil," one of the knights says. "What are we going to do?" "Help anyone you can find escape to the borders," Gwen responds. "Seek refuge with Queen Annis or Queen Mithian. They will not turn you away." "What about you, my lady?" "I belong in Camelot." "My lady, you must come with us." "I will not abandon my home." "You must save yourselves before it is too late." The knights then exchange looks, and they finally bow and exit out of the back. Gwen is left alone in the middle of the council chamber. Mounted on the wall behind her are 2 crossed swords, and she draws one. Never has she been more afraid. Clamouring arises outside the doors a few moments after the knight's departure, and Gwen straightens to her full height, hands trembling as she grips the sword. The door then bangs and she jolts, gasping, but they have not opened yet, and she closes her eyes, silently crying. The doors then bang again, and her eyes open, expecting to see enemy soldiers swarming in, but the doors are still shut. After Gwen takes a breath, the doors bang a third time, and this time they give way. Blindfolded still, Elaine leads enemy soldiers into the council chambers, heading for Gwen. Gwen lifts her sword and puts on a brave face, and she moves in to strike Elaine, but Elaine deflects the attack with her triple-bladed axe. They engage in combat for a few measures, slashing and blocking, locking and unlocking. Both are skilled warriors and are able to hold their own against each other. However, Elaine then uses her magic to ram Gwen into the stone floor, and Gwen gasps. She can't move. Something must be broken from such an impact. Elaine's shadow then crosses Gwen, as the sorceress then towers over her. Elaine then raises her triple-bladed axe, and Gwen watches in horror. We then go back to present day, and we see Elian's car pull up outside the courthouse. Yet even before it comes to a stop, Arthur swings open the door and runs out. He speeds up the flight of the steps, jumping a few steps at a time. Elian catches up with him as they burst through the doors into the entrance. "Where is she?" Arthur says. "Just down that hall to the left." But even before Elian finishes, Arthur is already running in that direction. We then go back to another flashback, and we see Merlin heartbroken as he closes Percival's eyes. He then puts his hand on one of Percival's for a moment, and then he gains control over his emotions and rises. Things just got personal. Elaine's army swarms all around him, but his eyes are dead set on the castle entrance. Many attempt to shoot arrows at him, but he uses his magic to ensure that they all miss. He then runs up the Griffin staircase, and down the Phoenix corridor, and races until he reaches the hall outside the throne room and enters. As he then enters the throne room, he sees Gwen lying motionless on the stone floor, her back to Merlin. Merlin's mouth falls open. No, not Gwen. He rushes towards her. "Gwen! Gwen!" Merlin says, horrified. He rolls Gwen onto her side, and he sees a deep, deep gash in her stomach. It's sickening to see. Elaine, still blindfolded, then slinks around from behind a column, and Merlin senses her presence and whirls around. "What have you done?" "What needed to be done." "Have you no mercy?" "Compassion blinds judgment. I serve only what the goddess has determined this world deserves. No more, no less." It's beyond too much for Merlin. All of his friends are dead. His home has been destroyed. It's no longer mere grief for him. He's been completely shattered. We then see him rise, trembling with rage. "This is not judgment. This is carnage. what you've done! You have defiled magic's sacred purpose! And you are no longer a worthy servant of the power you wield. Elaine, however, does not feel threatened, yet Merlin starts to incant. Be the heilig Eofu, Merlin begins to say. I bindan Eoa Sira Diap in Ayao. A gold vapour is sucked in glittering veins from Elaine's hands. What are you doing? Elaine says, less sure of herself. Eoa gif si fobiodon unjed widalik. The gold vapour then starts to evaporate through Elaine's blindfold from her eyes. It is sucked from every part of her, collecting into a brilliant golden globe that hovers in the air. What are you doing? Elaine asks him once again. From Merlin's hands, a silver vapour flows out and forms into a chain, and the chain coils around the hovering globe of Elaine's magic and binds it, and Elaine jolts. Io, miak, nifle, wieldan, hit, onagon, buta gif ablikan de klaft! Merlin then directs the bound globe back at Elaine, and shoots it into her with a vibrant flash of magic light that explodes, and Elaine collapses onto the floor. The globe has disappeared, and weakly, she pushes herself up and onto her hands and pulls off her blindfold. What did you do to me? I have bound your magic so deeply within you that you may never wield it again. Elaine gapes up at Merlin with fear, an emotion she has rarely experienced, and Merlin picks up Elaine's triple-bladed axe and draws near, weapon ready. He raises it up to strike a mortal blow. He can barely keep it steady, he's shaking with fury, and he stares at her for a long moment, and then casts it to the floor next to her. Remember what mercy feels like, he says. You would not have received it elsewhere. Elaine then crawls backwards a few paces, terrified. Taking the axe, she pushes herself up from the floor and flees. Now, Merlin throws himself down on his knees beside Gwen and pulls her into his arms. He then hears a moan from Gwen, and she stirs. She's still alive, and he presses the wound on her stomach. You're here, Gwen says. Gwen, your wound. The baby. She isn't there anymore, Merlin. She was stillborn. We lost her. Gwen gasps from the pain. It's too much. And Merlin cradles her, his battered heart breaking to see her this way. I'm so sorry, Gwen. It's alright. I'm going to be with her soon. Merlin, when Arthur comes back, you take good care of him. For me. This can't be happening, but Gwen draws one last frail breath. Gwen? Gwen! She's gone. And Merlin cradles Gwen, sobbing in the midst of the remnants of Camelot, his ruined home. We then head back to present day, and Arthur explodes into the courtroom. The court is in session and countless people fill the room, and they all turn their heads to see who has entered. But Arthur's gaze goes straight to Gwen, who sits at the bench, black robes, white wig, and their eyes meet. Guinevere, Arthur says, but no one in the room knows how to react to it. And what do you think you're doing? Gwen replies. Do you know him, Your Honour? Another man calls out. No. Guinevere! Arthur then starts down the aisle towards her, and from the corner of his eye he sees bailiffs motion to each other. A few of them then start to grab at Arthur as he breaks into a run, and he makes it to the bench before anyone can stop him. Guinevere! It's me! It's Arthur! I know you don't remember me, but I'm your husband, you have to listen. I've never seen you before in all my life. Who do you think you are to barge in during the middle of a trial? I know how insane this must sound, but you must believe me. You're mistaken. She then looks around the room. Will someone get him out of here? No, Guinevere! I could never mistake you. Why do you call me Guinevere? No one calls me that. I do. I always have. The bailiffs then advance on Arthur. Wait! Several centuries ago, against all odds, we fell in love, and we were married. But since then, I died, as did you, but we have both returned now. This is insane. Yes, it is. It's completely insane. But you must search your heart, Guinevere. You know who I am. The bailiffs then seize Arthur and struggle to gain control over him. No! Listen to me! Please, Guinevere! I'm begging you! Escort this man from the building. The bailiffs then begin pulling Arthur back. Come with us, sir, one of them says to him. Wait! Guinevere! Arthur says, struggling against them. You have to believe me! Gwen then turns back to her papers, and Arthur breaks free briefly before the bailiffs take hold of him once again and force him towards the door. Guinevere! No! As they haul him away, Arthur desperately screams out. Guinevere, please! Guinevere! The bailiffs then force Arthur out of the room and shut the door. Let's resume, Gwen says after clearing her throat. We were in the middle of discussing the... We were discussing the... Gwen gazes at the door out which Arthur was just dragged, and a frown begins to form on her face. She then begins to have a brief flash of a memory. One of the first moments Arthur said her full name. Guinevere. He's always spoken it with such love. Arthur, she whispers to herself. What was that, Your Honour? Arthur, she remembers, and Gwen bolts upright and bangs the gavel. The court is adjourned! She then races away from the bench and takes off down the aisle after Arthur, leaving the people of the court baffled. She tears off her white wig as she races down the hall at full speed, her black judge's gown flowing, and Arthur can still be heard shouting her name. Guinevere! No, let me go! Guinevere! Gwen follows his voice, darting around the corner to see the bailiffs dragging him down the hall. Arthur! Arthur's head then jerks around and he sees her. Guinevere! Arthur escapes the bailiff's clutches, and the king and queen sprint to each other, meeting at the middle of the hall. They throw their arms around each other in a passionate embrace, and after a few moments of this, he pulls back to look into her eyes. I love you, Guinevere. And I you. They then kiss passionately, and then Arthur lifts her off her feet and spins her around, rejoicing in the moment. We then go back to Merlin's flat, and a cup of tea is clasped between Morgana's hand as she sits on Merlin's sofa looking distressed and uncomfortable. Galahad plays quietly with his toy knights on the floor, making the usual little clashing noises as he pretends the toys are engaged in mortal combat. Merlin then enters the living room. I've got your dress soaking, he says. I wouldn't worry about the coffee. I'm pretty good at getting stains out. Morgana then nods. She feels horrible about the scene she made earlier on the street, and Merlin can sense her discomfort. After a moment, he then joins Galahad on the floor. What are you up to over here? Just playing. I see you've got all your knights set up. Yep. Morgana then observes Merlin as he picks up one of the toy knights. Who's this? That's Sir Lancelot. Ah, the bravest and noblest of them all. Debatable. Oh. Well, who do you think's the bravest and noblest then? Galahad then raises a toy knight clad in white armour, bearing a white shield with a red cross on it. Sir Galahad. Oh, of course. Merlin then glances at Morgana, who gives a mild smile of gratitude. Are you hungry yet? Starving. Galahad responds before Morgana can even answer. Good. So you can stay for dinner. Merlin then gets to his feet and heads into the kitchen, and Morgana watches him go, surprised at how considerate he's being after his behaviour the night before. We then go back to another flashback, and Merlin stands in the water between two burial boats. One boat holds Gwen's body, while the other bears Percival's, both more peaceful in death than they were in life. Merlin's eyes then flash gold and his magic makes the boats drift forward into the sparkling water. He lets his eyes fall shut, as though by closing them, he can block out all of the devastation. Merlin freezes. Is that who he thinks it is? He opens his eyes and before him, standing atop of the water, is Freya, the endearing druid girl who captured his heart when he was young. Breathtaking gown, beautiful, but her eyes glitter with pity. You've been so strong, Merlin, she continues to say, but Merlin is too stunned from all that has happened to speak. You have endured far more than any man should have to undergo, which is why I have been sent now to offer you a choice. A choice. As is foretold, the once and future king will rise again, but the moment of his return is not known, even to those who reside in Avalon. However, we do know that it will take time. How much time? A long time. Centuries, perhaps. Centuries. Can I see him? Can I see Arthur? Not until his return, but right now, you have a decision to make. Should you choose to, you can sleep in Avalon until the king's time has come, and wake when he awakes. The centuries would be no more to you than a passing dream. And the alternative? You wait here, for however long it takes. How can that be? You said it could take centuries. You have been blessed with immortality, Merlin. You may choose to spend it either waiting for your king in this world, or sleeping in the next. Choose carefully, however, for once your decision has been made, you will not be able to change it. Merlin, who is still in shock, weighs what has been laid before him, knowing that this moment will determine all that is to come. He waits a few seconds before finally speaking up. But there's no telling how much the world may have changed by the time Arthur returns. Centuries will no doubt take their toll. We would awaken to a world of which we knew nothing. This is true. Arthur will need someone to guide him, to prepare for his coming. It sounds as though you have already made your decision. I have. I will wait for Arthur. Here. I thought you would say that, Freya says with a sad smile. So be it. But I shall not see you again until the end of time. Leaning forward, Freya then kisses Merlin, but he is too overwhelmed coming to grips with everything she's told him to kiss back. And when Merlin opens his eyes, Freya is gone, and now Merlin is alone. Completely, and because of his choice. He knows he'll remain that way for a very long time. We then head back to present day, in Merlin's flat, and we see Merlin clearing the dishes away from the table, where Morgana and Galahad still sit, and carries them into the kitchen. As Galahad then returns to his toys, the phone rings. Honestly, this is getting ridiculous. And then before answering it, Merlin once again changes his voice. No, you cannot have my castle, and for what it's worth, my health is very, very decent. Miss Darlene Plunkett, I must insist that you reconsider. I need that castle. Alright. I will reconsider. No! Good day, sir. Do not call again. Merlin then hangs up the phone, and Morgana enters the kitchen. Who was that? It was a, wrong number. Do you always use that voice when answering the phone? Depends on who's calling. Merlin then casts another anxious glance up at the clock, and he starts to prepare the dishes for washing. Morgana begins to say, sorry about earlier. It's fine. Of all people, I can understand having an off day. It feels like every day is an off day for me lately. Merlin then nods towards one of the plates. Can you pass me that? Morgana then picks up the dish and hands it to Merlin, but the plate slips from Merlin's wet hand and drops towards the floor. Suddenly the plate freezes mid-fall, and Merlin looks up. Morgana's eyes have turned gold. Her magic is suspending the plate mid-air. Morgana gasps as she realises what is happening. Somehow she releases the plate from her magical hold, and it shatters on the floor. And Merlin stares at her, terrified that she might remember who he is. I'm sorry. I have no idea how that happened. I should go. She then leaves the kitchen in a rush, and Merlin looks from his broken plate to Morgana, who ushers Galahad to gather up his toys. It's time to go, Gally. Get your things. Merlin then follows her into the living room. Morgana. Thank you for dinner. She and Galahad then start for the door. Morgana. He's then interrupted by a knock, and Morgana glances at Merlin. He wasn't expecting anyone. She then opens the door, and Arthur and Gwen stand outside in the hall, and upon seeing Morgana, Gwen's eyes fly open wide. You! Morgana is startled. How does she respond to that? Guinevere, Arthur says. I can explain. Merlin's eyes drift past Morgana to Gwen. Could it be? His friend from so many years ago? I can see we're intruding, Morgana says, anxious to leave. Come, Gally. Morgana and Galahad then exit, and Arthur and Gwen hurry inside and shut the door. Arthur, why was Morgana here? Gwen says. Guinevere, calm down. She doesn't remember who she is. Yes, I can see that. But what was she doing here? Gwen. Gwen's gaze then passes to Merlin. Merlin? They stare at each other for a moment, and then Gwen runs to him and flings her arms around him in a deep embrace. Merlin! It's been so long. I can't believe you're here. Gwen, I thought I'd never see you again. Gwen then pulls back. Arthur's told me how you waited for him. I can hardly wrap my mind around it. Oh, Merlin, how you must have suffered. He can't deny it, but looking at her he breaks into an emotional grin. I can't believe you're here, he says. How did Arthur find you? Elian led the way, Arthur cuts in. He's back at Gwen's house now. He still doesn't remember. Merlin then turns to Arthur, remembering his rage. What were you thinking, just taking off like that? Mordred is watching! I know, I lied. I'm a complete ass. You should hate me. But by that infuriating smirk on Arthur's face, it's clear he knows that would be impossible for Merlin at this point. Damn you, Merlin says with a grin, and he pulls Arthur in for an angry hug. It's a miracle they didn't kill you. They almost took Morgana. What? Morgana? Is she alright? They're then once again interrupted by another knock at the door, and they all stare. Back up, Merlin says. It could be Mordred. Arthur and Gwen back away, and Merlin leans up against a wall beside the door. Who's there? I've come to speak with Miss Darlene Plunkett, who I am told resides here. I have been polite, but no more. I need that castle, so now we must speak face to face. Darlene Plunkett, Arthur says, confused. What? Merlin mutters to himself. How did he ever learn where I live? Merlin then swings the door open, prepared to chew the man out, but stops short, realising that it's none other than Leon. Merlin? Leon says, but Merlin can't form a response. How? Leon then looks past him, and his eyes wide with amazement, singling out Arthur, and then Gwen. Gwen, who is holding hands with Arthur, her other husband.